A German philosopher asked a rare question. What if our feelings are not random reactions, but paths that reveal the value of the world? Max Scheler believed that emotions can show what matters most. He studied how we sense value, how love orders our life, how resentment distorts our vision, and how shame and modesty shape who we become. For him, the person is more than thought or instinct. It is a center of acts that open us to others and to the world. Scheler saw humanity in a wide landscape, from our place in the cosmos to the traces of something timeless within us. Kant was wrong, not slightly mistaken or partially off course, but fundamentally wrong about the very nature of morality. For over a century, his formal ethics dominated philosophy, claiming that moral law must be empty of content, universal in form, derived purely from reason. Scheler saw through this elegant illusion and exposed its bankruptcy. What makes an action right? Kant answered. Follow the categorical imperative. Act only according to maxims you could will as universal law. Notice what this excludes. Content, substance, the actual values at stake. A formal shell replaces living moral experience. The categorical imperative could justify almost anything if you formulate the maxim cleverly enough. Worse still, it treats morality as obedience to self-imposed rational rules, reducing ethics to a kind of logical consistency. Real moral life operates differently. When you encounter suffering, you do not first derive universal principles. You feel the wrongness directly, immediately, before any reasoning begins. The value of compassion reveals itself through emotional intuition, not logical deduction. Similarly with beauty, nobility, or holiness. These values possess content, substance, richness that no formal principle can capture. They are material, not merely structural. This rehabilitation of emotions scandalized the philosophical establishment. Since Plato, Western thought had treated feelings as obstacles to truth, chaotic forces requiring rational control. Kant perfected this prejudice by locating morality entirely in reason, dismissing feelings as pathological inclinations. Scheler reversed everything. Feelings are not blind, but cognitive. They disclose values that reason alone cannot access. Love knows things about its beloved that analysis never reaches. Nevertheless, acknowledging that values are felt raises urgent questions. If different people feel differently, does morality dissolve into relativism? If emotions guide us, how do we distinguish genuine moral insight from mere preference? The answer required recognizing that values themselves have structure, an objective ordering that feeling can perceive correctly or incorrectly. Some values genuinely stand higher than others, and understanding this hierarchy becomes essential. Values form ranks. This is not opinion or cultural preference, but objective fact, discoverable through careful attention to how values actually present themselves. 4 distinct levels ascend from lowest to highest, each irreducible to those below it, each opening onto richer dimensions of existence. At the foundation lie sensory values, pleasant and unpleasant, agreeable and disagreeable. These values attach to physical sensation and bodily states, a comfortable temperature, delicious food, freedom from pain. Real values, genuinely good, yet limited in scope and duration. Pleasure passes quickly. It divides when shared. Since my enjoyment of this meal means you cannot enjoy the same portion. Sensory values remain bound to individual bodies in specific moments. Above these rise vital values, health and sickness, strength and weakness, vitality and exhaustion. These concern the flourishing of life itself rather than mere sensation. An athlete endures discomfort for the higher value of fitness. A parent sacrifices comfort for their child's well-being. Vital values last longer than sensory pleasures and can be shared more fully. Your health does not diminish mine. Nevertheless, they remain tied to biological existence, unable to transcend life's organic conditions. Higher still stand spiritual values, beauty and ugliness, justice and injustice, knowledge and ignorance. These values belong to persons as spiritual beings, not merely living organisms. A mathematical proof discovered 3,000 years ago remains valuable today. Beauty in a painting does not decay with the canvas. Justice matters regardless of survival advantages. Spiritual values endure beyond individual lives and grow when shared. Teaching someone mathematics does not deplete your own understanding, but often deepens it. At the summit dwells the holy, not moral goodness, but the sacred itself, the absolute that grounds all other values. Religious experience opens onto this highest sphere, where finite persons encounter infinite value. The holy cannot be reduced to usefulness, beauty, or even moral virtue. It is the dimension where ultimate meaning reveals itself, where human existence touches what exceeds all human measure. How do we know this hierarchy is objective, rather than subjective projection? Through phenomenological attention to the values themselves. When forced to choose between pleasure and health, we recognize health as higher. When art conflicts with comfort, we acknowledge beauty's superiority. When moral duty demands sacrifice of life itself, we grasp that spiritual values can outrank vital ones. The ordering shows itself to feeling, though feeling itself can be deformed, blinded, poisoned. Understanding how we actually perceive values requires examining the cognitive role of emotions more carefully. Can you think your way to love? The question exposes philosophy's deepest prejudice. For centuries, Western thought assumed that genuine knowledge comes through reason, while emotions merely disturb clear thinking. Feelings were relegated to psychology, treated as subjective states that tell us about ourselves, but nothing about reality. This is catastrophically backwards. Emotions have intentional structure. When you feel gratitude, you are grateful for something. When you experience indignation, you are indignant at some injustice. Feelings aim at their objects just as perception aims at visible things, or thought aims at concepts. Moreover, these feelings disclose features of their objects that other modes of consciousness cannot reach. You perceive color through sight, not through reasoning about wavelengths. Similarly, you perceive value through feeling, not through logical analysis of properties. Consider how love operates. You love someone, and through that love, values in the beloved become visible that others miss entirely. Not because you create those values through loving, but because love opens your eyes to what was already there. Parents see preciousness in their children that strangers overlook. Friends recognize nobility in each other that acquaintances never notice. Love is not blind, but revelatory. It uncovers the value-laden depths of persons. Hate works inversely. Where love reveals, hate conceals. When you hate someone, their genuine values become invisible to you. Every action appears suspect. Every quality seems worthless. Hatred is cognitive blindness, a closing off from values that objectively exist. This demonstrates something crucial about emotions generally. They are not merely reactions to value, but modes of value apprehension. We feel values before we think about them, and reasoning about ethics without first feeling the values in question produces empty formalism. Scheler developed these insights while explicitly pursuing what he called Christian philosophy, combining phenomenological rigor with religious commitment. His ethics emerged from careful attention to actual moral experience rather than abstract construction of principles. Yet this raises a profound question. If we each perceive values through feeling, and different people feel differently, how do we explain moral disagreement? The answer lies in recognizing that each person possesses a unique ordering of what they love, an inner hierarchy that defines their very being more fundamentally than their thoughts or beliefs. Who are you? Most people answer with fact: your name, profession, nationality, beliefs. Yet these describe surfaces rather than depths. A deeper truth defines your being, what you love, and in what order. Two people can share identical beliefs, values, and circumstances while remaining radically different persons because their hearts are ordered differently. Your order of love is the hierarchy of what matters to you, arranged not by conscious decision but by the spontaneous movements of your heart. Some people love pleasure above all, organizing their entire existence around comfort and enjoyment. Others love power, subordinating every other value to domination and control. Still others love knowledge, beauty, justice, or the divine. Not what people claim to value, but what they actually love. When choices force priorities reveals who they truly are. This ordering operates largely beneath conscious awareness. You discover your order of love through your actions, especially when values conflict. When career demands sacrifice family time, which do you choose? When comfort conflicts with integrity, where does your heart actually move? When pleasure opposes duty, what wins? These moments expose the real hierarchy governing your existence, often surprising you with revelations about your own depths. Moral corruption is fundamentally disorder of love, not ignorance of what is good, but loving lower values above higher ones. The person who sacrifices friendship for money, beauty for utility, or justice for security has an inverted order of love. They may know intellectually that friendship outranks wealth, yet their heart moves in the opposite direction. Abstract knowledge cannot correct this, because the problem lies deeper than concepts. Therefore, genuine moral education means reforming the order of love itself, not teaching principles or drilling rules, but cultivating the heart's capacity to respond rightly to values. How does this happen? Through exposure to higher values in living form, through models who embody right ordering, through practices that train emotional perception. When you learn to love rightly, everything changes. Your perception shifts, your choices align differently, your entire being reorients itself. Nevertheless, this raises a troubling question. If our order of love defines us so fundamentally, what exactly is this self that loves? Traditional philosophy identified the person with consciousness, substance, or biological organism. Each reduction misses something essential about personal being, something that becomes clear only when we examine how persons actually exist. Strip away everything accidental, and what remains? Philosophers searched for centuries, seeking the substantial core beneath changing appearances, the soul, the self, the transcendental ego. Each attempt tried to identify the person with some thing, some persistent substance underlying experience. All these efforts failed because they misunderstood what persons are. Persons are not substances, but unities of acts. You are not primarily what you are made of, whether physical matter or mental substance. Rather, you are what you do, the living center from which acts emanate. When you perceive, judge, love, hate, decide, these acts flow from personal being without being reducible to any substrate beneath them. The person is the irreducible performer of these performances. This transforms everything. Psychology studies acts as observable behaviors or mental states, treating them as objects for scientific investigation. Yet the person performing those acts escapes objectification entirely. You can measure someone's reactions, map their neural activity, catalog their behaviors. None of this captures the person who performs these acts, the center that can never become mere object precisely because it is the subject of all experiencing. Biology similarly misses the person. Your body is objectifiable, analyzable, subject to causal laws. The person is not. When you make a decision, neural events occur in your brain. However, the decision itself transcends those events, cannot be reduced to them without remainder. The person who decides exists in a different dimension than the organism that supports personal acts. Even consciousness fails to capture personal being. Consciousness can be studied phenomenologically as a stream of experiences. Yet the person is not the stream, but the one for whom the stream exists, the center that lives through conscious acts without being identical to them. You are present in your perceiving, thinking, and willing, yet you are not merely the sum of these activities. What then are persons? the irreducible centers of acts that can never be fully grasped from outside, because they are always the inside, the perspective from which everything else is viewed. Persons transcend all objectification because objectifying requires a subject, and that subject is precisely the person who cannot be turned into object without contradiction. Furthermore, persons exist essentially in relation to other persons, not accidentally connected but structurally open to encounter with other centers of act performance. How we relate to others, how we grasp their feelings and participate in their experiences, reveals dimensions of personal being that solitary analysis never reaches. Understanding fellow feeling requires distinguishing its various forms, from shallow emotional contagion to genuine participation in another's life. Watch a crowd panic. One person screams, others immediately scream too. Fear spreads like wildfire through the group, each individual caught in collective emotion. This is emotional contagion, the most primitive form of fellow feeling. Yet calling it fellow feeling is generous. Nobody feels for anyone else here. Rather, emotion transmits mechanically, infecting those nearby without requiring any recognition of others as distinct persons. Mothers experience this with infants constantly. The baby cries, and suddenly the mother feels distressed, not because she judges the situation, not because she decides to share the emotion, but through immediate contagion. The boundary between self and other has not yet fully formed. Emotional states flow across it effortlessly. Useful for survival, perhaps, yet this is not genuine empathy because it lacks the structure of recognizing another person as separate center of feeling. A second form rises above contagion. Feeling for another's emotion differs from feeling the same emotion. When your friend grieves, you do not necessarily grieve yourself. Instead, you feel compassion for their grief, concern for their pain. This requires recognizing the other as distinct person whose emotional state differs from your own. You remain separate while responding to their separateness. Progress beyond mere contagion, yet still not the deepest form of participation. Sympathy proper involves something more intimate, not just feeling for someone, but feeling with them, participating in their very experience. When you genuinely sympathize, you do not simply observe another's joy or sorrow from outside. Rather, you enter into it, sharing the intentional structure of their feeling while maintaining your own distinct center. Their joy becomes partly yours without ceasing to be primarily theirs. This is possible only between persons who recognize each other as irreducible centers of value feeling. Scheler's analysis of sympathy profoundly influenced medical ethics and nursing theory, particularly regarding how healthcare providers should relate to patient suffering. Mere contagion leads to burnout, as the nurse absorbs every patient's pain. Detached observation fails to provide genuine care. Proper sympathy allows participation in suffering while maintaining the separateness necessary for actually helping, rather than drowning in shared distress. Yet fellow feeling faces constant distortion. Perhaps the most dangerous corruption comes not from feeling too little, but from feeling wrongly, from emotions poisoned at their source by unacknowledged resentment. When desires go unfulfilled and pride prohibits admitting defeat, something toxic begins growing in the soul, falsifying our entire perception of values. Picture someone passed over for promotion. They worked hard, believed themselves deserving, expected recognition. Instead, a colleague received the position. Now watch what happens inside. At first, simple disappointment, then anger. Eventually, if the wound festers long enough, something more sinister emerges. They begin explaining why the promotion never mattered anyway. Management positions are soul-crushing. Leadership corrupts. The successful colleague probably cheated somehow. Real fulfillment comes from staying true to your principles at the lower level. This is resentment in its pure form, not honest acknowledgement that you wanted something and failed to achieve it. Rather, the impotent hatred that rewrites value itself to avoid facing powerlessness. You cannot reach the grapes, so you declare them sour. Unable to achieve excellence, you redefine excellence As mediocrity, blocked from higher values, you invert the hierarchy entirely, claiming that lower values were actually superior all along. The poison spreads beyond individual psychology into entire moral systems. Nietzsche identified slave morality as resentment crystallized into ethics. The weak cannot dominate the strong, so they declare strength evil and weakness virtuous. Unable to create beauty, they sanctify ugliness as authenticity. Incapable of nobility, they praise humility as highest virtue. Every value gets inverted to justify impotence, transforming failure into moral superiority. Scheler recognized that Nietzsche was partly right, but fundamentally wrong. Resentment does generate value-delusion, does poison perception at its source. However, Nietzsche himself suffered from resentment against Christian values he could not genuinely embody. His attack on compassion revealed his own inability to love rightly. The diagnosis was accurate, yet the diagnostician suffered from the disease he identified. Nevertheless, resentment operates through self-deception. Nobody consciously thinks they are falsifying values to protect wounded pride. The deception penetrates so deeply that the inverted values seem genuinely perceived, objectively true. This is why resentment is so dangerous. It makes you incapable of recognizing your own corruption. You believe you see clearly while actually drowning in delusion. Can resentment be cured? Only through genuine humility that accepts limitation, without inventing compensatory lies. Acknowledging that you wanted what you could not achieve, that others possess values you lack, that the hierarchy stands independent of your success or failure. This acceptance requires a deeper value, protecting the person from complete dissolution into shame, a value that guards the intimate sphere where genuine selfhood dwells. Ancient cultures veiled the holy. Temples had inner sanctums where only priests could enter. Sacred objects remained covered except during ritual moments. Mystery religions guarded their teachings from uninitiated eyes. Modern people dismiss this as superstition or oppression. What if they understood something we have forgotten? Shame guards the intimate sphere of the person. Not pathological shame that poisons self-regard, but the healthy sense that certain dimensions of existence should not be exposed to every gaze. Your body is not merely meat to be displayed indifferently. Your sexuality is not performance to be exhibited publicly. Your deepest feelings are not content for mass consumption. These belong to the sacred core of personhood, and protecting them through modesty is not repression, but wisdom. Consider how exposure functions. In medical contexts, physical nakedness serves healing purposes and carries no violation. The same exposure in commercial exploitation destroys something precious. Context determines whether unveiling serves genuine value or degrades it. Modesty knows this instinctively, sensing when revelation enriches and when it corrupts. The shameless person has lost this discrimination, treating everything as equally appropriate for any audience. Contemporary culture celebrates shamelessness as liberation. Confess everything on social media. Display your body without reservation. Eliminate all privacy as outdated prudery. Yet this supposed freedom often enslaves. When nothing remains sacred, when every intimate dimension gets commodified and consumed, personhood itself erodes. You become surface without depth, performance without genuine self, object for others rather than subject of your own existence. Furthermore, shame reveals the sacred within ourselves. The blush that accompanies exposure is not merely social conditioning, but recognition that something valuable has been violated. You feel shame when the holy is profaned, when what should remain protected gets degraded. This feeling guards personal dignity precisely by marking boundaries that should not be crossed. Modesty operates differently across value spheres. Physical modesty protects bodily intimacy. Intellectual modesty guards against arrogant claims beyond our knowledge. Spiritual modesty recognizes that ultimate mysteries exceed human comprehension. Each form preserves appropriate limits, preventing the violation that comes from treating everything as equally accessible. The convergence appears. Both resentment and shamelessness involve value inversion. Resentment falsifies the hierarchy, declaring lower values higher. Shamelessness eliminates the distinction between sacred and profane, treating all values as equally displayable. Both corruptions arise from refusing to acknowledge genuine value differences. Yet beyond these distortions lies another problem. Even without resentment or shamelessness, some people simply cannot perceive certain values at all. They suffer from moral blindness, as real as physical blindness, though far more difficult to recognize. Can everyone see red? Most people assume yes. Then you discover color blindness exists. Some individuals lack the receptors that distinguish certain hues. Show them red and green, they see different shades of the same color. Not stupidity or willful ignorance, but physiological incapacity. The colors exist objectively, yet their perceptual apparatus cannot register them. Values work similarly. Each person possesses a unique spectrum of value sensitivity. What appears radiant to one person remains invisible to another. Not because the value is absent or because one person is morally inferior, but because different individuals have different capacities for value perception. Just as you cannot teach a colorblind person to see red through reasoning, you cannot make a value-blind person feel values beyond their spectrum. Consider someone utterly insensitive to beauty. Show them sublime art and mediocre decoration, they perceive no significant difference. Not because they lack education or because nobody explained aesthetic principles. Rather, they lack the emotional receptors that would make beauty accessible. The value is there, radiating its presence. Their perceptual apparatus simply cannot register it. This explains intractable moral disagreements. Two people argue about the value of tradition. One feels it deeply, senses the sacred significance of inherited practices, experiences violation when traditions are carelessly abandoned. The other perceives nothing, sees only arbitrary customs that reason should replace with optimal solutions. Neither is lying or confused. They inhabit different value worlds because their capacities for value intuition differ. Layered analysis reveals complexity. Value blindness operates at different levels. Some people lack sensitivity to entire value spheres. They might perceive sensory and vital values perfectly while remaining completely blind to spiritual or holy values. Others have gaps within spheres, sensing beauty in visual art but not in music, feeling compassion for animals but not for humans. The patterns vary infinitely. Moreover, value blindness is not static. Emotional capacities can develop or atrophy. Someone blind to certain values might gain sensitivity through transformative experiences, through love that opens new dimensions of perception, through suffering that awakens dormant capacities. Conversely, sensitivity can be destroyed through trauma, corruption, or systematic value inversion. Your value spectrum shifts throughout life, sometimes expanding, sometimes contracting. Reconstruction follows. If value blindness is real, moral education has necessary limits. You cannot teach someone to feel values beyond their capacity any more than you can teach a deaf person to hear symphonies through argument. However, you can cultivate existing sensitivities, can expose people to values within their spectrum, can create conditions where dormant capacities might awaken. Furthermore, you can develop intellectual understanding of values you cannot feel, recognizing their reality even when they remain phenomenologically inaccessible. This leads to transformation in how we judge others. Someone who acts against values they genuinely cannot perceive is not evil but limited. Their responsibility differs from someone who perceives values clearly and violates them knowingly. Moral evaluation must account for actual perceptual capacity rather than assuming everyone sees the same value landscape. Scheler himself embodied these complexities paradoxically. His personal life was notoriously scandalous, including multiple marriages and affairs that violated the very values his philosophy celebrated. Some accused him of being value-blind to certain ethical demands, perhaps. Or perhaps he perceived the values but lacked the strength to live according to what he saw. Seeing and doing are not identical. Nevertheless, his analysis of value perception revealed something essential. Love and hate are not mere feelings, but modes of value disclosure that can reveal or conceal what genuinely exists. Does love create value or reveal it? The Romantic tradition claimed love invents worth in the beloved, projecting beauty onto ordinary objects through emotional enchantment. This is precisely backwards. Love does not create, but discovers. It opens eyes to values already present, yet invisible to indifferent observation. Think about how love operates in practice. A mother loves her child and sees preciousness others miss. Did her love manufacture that value from nothing? Absurd. The child possessed worth before being loved, yet that worth remained hidden until love disclosed it. Similarly, when you fall in love with someone, you do not conjure their beauty through feeling. Rather, love allows you to perceive beauty that was always there, waiting for recognition. This explains why love feels like discovery rather than invention. You experience it as finding something real, encountering genuine value, not as creating illusions. The beloved does not become valuable because you love them. You love them because you have perceived their value, and that perception opens further value dimensions that remain concealed to those who do not love. Love is movement toward higher value in the beloved, perpetual discovery of richer depths. Hate functions as the inverse mechanism. Where love reveals, hate conceals. When you hate someone, their genuine values become invisible. Every action appears malicious. Every quality seems worthless. Every achievement gets dismissed as lucky accident or cynical manipulation. This is not mere emotional bias, but active value blindness. Hatred closes the perceptual organs that would otherwise register real worth. Nevertheless, both love and hate are cognitive. They disclose or conceal what objectively exists rather than creating subjective fantasies. You can love wrongly by perceiving values that are not there, just as you can see wrongly by hallucinating objects that do not exist. Error is possible precisely because these feelings aim at objective features of reality. When love perceives accurately, it knows the beloved better than analysis ever could. When it perceives inaccurately, it suffers genuine delusion rather than mere preference. This cognitive dimension of love transforms how we understand moral and spiritual development. Growing in love means developing more accurate and comprehensive value perception. Learning to love rightly means training your pruvises, emotional intuition, to respond appropriately to the value hierarchy. The person who loves higher values above lower ones, who perceives the spiritual above the merely vital, who recognizes the holy above all else, has achieved not just good character, but true vision. Yet this raises the ultimate question. What makes humans capable of such vision? What distinguishes human existence from merely animal life? The answer requires examining our unique position in the cosmos, the strange duality that defines our being as simultaneously embedded in nature and transcending it. Animals cannot fast. This simple fact reveals everything. A hungry dog will eat when food appears. Instinct drives action directly. No gap opens between impulse and response. The animal lives entirely within its drives, carried along by vital forces without distance or reflection. Humans alone can say no. This capacity for negation defines our essence. You feel hunger but refuse to eat. Desire surges but you deny it. Satisfaction. Vital drives push toward immediate gratification, yet you resist, postpone, redirect them toward higher purposes. The space between impulse and action, the gap where refusal becomes possible, marks the emergence of spirit within life. Spirit is not supernatural addition to natural being, but a unique mode of relating to our own nature. Animals are their drives. Humans have drives, but also stand apart from them through the power of objectification. You can observe your own anger rather than simply being angry. You can examine your desires rather than immediately fulfilling them. This self-distance, this capacity to make yourself an object for reflection, separates human existence from animal immersion. Furthermore, this spiritual capacity enables world openness. Animals inhabit environments, closed circuits of stimuli and responses shaped by instinctual programming. Humans inhabit worlds, open horizons of meaning that transcend immediate biological needs. You can contemplate distant galaxies that serve no survival function. You can pursue abstract mathematics irrelevant to reproduction. You can sacrifice life itself for ideals that contradict vital interests. Spirit opens onto reality as such, rather than merely species-specific environments. Asceticism becomes the distinctly human possibility, not merely controlling desires, but negating vital drives for the sake of higher values. The monk who fasts does not simply delay gratification, but actively opposes biological imperatives. The martyr who accepts death violates the most fundamental instinct for survival. These acts are uniquely human, precisely because they require spirit's capacity to negate life itself. Yet humans are not pure spirit. We remain embedded in vital processes, biological organisms subject to needs and drives. Hunger returns after fasting. Sexual desire persists despite sublimation. Death eventually claims every ascetic. The human condition is irreducible, duality, spirit. Incarnate in life, consciousness rooted in flesh. We can transcend our drives, but never escape them completely. This duality generates perpetual tension. Spirit seeks eternal values. Life demands immediate satisfaction. Consciousness aims at universal truth. Embodiment confines us to limited perspectives. The person transcends objectification, yet the body remains thoroughly objectifiable. We exist between animal and angel, belonging fully to neither realm. Nevertheless, this precarious position opens unique possibilities. Only beings who can negate vital drives can genuinely affirm them. Only consciousness that transcends the given can freely engage it. Only persons who are not simply their nature can take responsibility for what they become. Our weakness is our strength, our dividedness the condition of our freedom. Through this strange existence between spirit and life, finite persons gain access to something infinite. All values end. Pleasure fades, health decays, beauty deteriorates, knowledge becomes obsolete. Even justice, the highest spiritual value, pertains to finite arrangements among finite beings. Yet something in human experience exceeds finitude entirely, touches what cannot decay or diminish, participates in the absolute. This is the holy. The holy is not moral goodness. You can be ethically perfect while remaining entirely within the finite. Justice between persons, compassion for suffering, respect for dignity, all these achieve high spiritual value without reaching the sacred. The holy belongs to a different dimension altogether, the sphere where finite existence encounters the infinite ground of all being. Religious acts are unique. They cannot be reduced to psychology, sociology, or ethics without destroying what makes them religious. When you pray, you are not merely talking to yourself or reinforcing social bonds. You are addressing the absolute, entering into relation with what transcends all finite reality. When you experience the pras, sacred, you are not projecting emotions onto neutral objects. You are responding to genuine presence of the holy, recognizing value that exceeds all human measure. This irreducibility frustrated reductionist approaches to religion. Freud tried explaining religious experience as sublimated sexuality. Durkheim reduced it to social cohesion. Marx dismissed it as ideological distortion. Each attempt missed the phenomenon by explaining it away rather than understanding it on its own terms. The holy reveals itself only to those who approach it as holy rather than as something else in disguise. Nevertheless, how can finite persons access infinite value? Through the structure of personhood itself. The person is not merely biological organism or psychological system, but center of acts that transcend all objectification. This transcendence within finitude creates opening toward the absolute. You are finite being who can think infinity, temporal creature who grasps eternity, limited perspective that aims at unlimited truth. The very structure of personal existence points beyond itself. Love provides the bridge. Not erotic love confined to finite beloveds, but the movement toward absolute value that religious love embodies. When you love God, you are not loving another finite person writ large. You are participating in the infinite itself, entering into relation with the ground of all value. This participation does not make you infinite, but allows finite being to touch what exceeds finitude. Scheler insisted that philosophical anthropology remains incomplete without acknowledging this religious dimension. Humans are not simply rational animals or symbol-using creatures. We are beings who can encounter the holy, who carry infinity within finitude, who participate in eternal values through temporal acts. Eliminating this dimension produces truncated understanding of human existence. The divine ground is not distant object, but intimate presence, closer to you than you are to yourself, more fundamental than your own foundation. Every act of value perception participates in absolute value. Every genuine love reaches toward infinite love. Every person embodies the paradox of finite being open to infinity. You are not accidentally religious, but essentially so. The eternal dwells in man not as foreign addition, but as the deepest truth of personal existence itself. Philosophy that ignores this commits the same error as ethics that ignores feeling. It cuts itself off from the very reality it claims to understand.